Rav Achabar Huna. It's about 10 lines from the bottom, maybe a little more, on Lamed Amud Bet. The line starts with the word Mizeh. 14 lines from the bottom. Okay, so basically, we talked in Mishnah that the Levi'im once the witnesses did not come on Rosh Hashanah, so they said the wrong wrong Shira when they brought the afternoon Tamid, and from then on they established the edict not to accept the witnesses from Mincha time onward, so that they would know that that if they hadn't come until then, it was not going to be Rosh Hashanah that day, because they would not accept witnesses even if they came. Regardless, though, they refrained from malacha for the remainder of the day in order that people should not treat the day next year with less weight and with less seriousness, which is part of the whole idea of Kedusha Achat, which is not our focus. Let's see, and then there was a debate in the Gemara we just did yesterday about whether it is the wrong thing they did that they said the wrong Shira, they said the Shira of the weekday, or is it that they did not say any Shira at all because they did not know what would happen? I just want to make a comment before we continue, which is that with this Mishnah, we have now established that the topic of Kiddush HaChodesh is in every single parak of Rosh Hashanah. It started at the end of the first parak, it went through the entire second parak, the first Mishnah of the third parak. It could have easily been the last of the second, because the third parak was about actually the shofar and Rosh Hashanah itself, but no, the first Mishnah had to end the Kiddush HaChodesh discussion, right? Ra'u Beisim V'chol Yisrael, and now in the fourth parak we have to once again get into the Kiddush HaChodesh discussion. So I don't know what that means. I mean, my guess is that it's because this obviously was an area that was highly contested between, the Prushim and the Tzedukim, and of course whoever controls the calendar controls the entire, observance of the people, the entire liturgical calendar. It was obviously something of great importance. I don't think it's just by chance that every single parak of Rosh Hashanah deals with Kiddush HaChodesh. Yes.
Should have called it Masechet Kiddush HaChodesh.
Well, there you go. So anyway, let's take a look at the Gemara. Masi Rav Achabar Huna. So Rav Achabar Huna asks, coming to Rosh Hashanah, Shacharit Karet Kilchato. So now we're going to get to exactly what they would do. So in the morning Tamid of the 30th of Elul, the day they were expecting to be Rosh Hashanah, but because it was all usually on the 30th of Elul, but nevertheless, since it had not yet, witnesses would almost never come by the time of the morning Tamid. So the morning Tamid, they just established that the Shir Shoyom, they would say, would be the normal Shir Shoyom, like we say in our Sidurim, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, whatever the day of the week is. They would not yet reflect the yontif identity of it on Rosh Hashanah. On another Chag, they would by the morning Tamid, but on Rosh Hashanah, they would always do the day of the week by the morning Tamid. Okay, b'musaf, Mahu Omer, now witnesses will come, and you realize it's Rosh Hashanah, so you're going to bring a musaf. Okay, so what is the Shira that you say by the musaf of Rosh Hashanah? Haninu le'Elohim uzeinu harilu le'Yakov. Okay, so it's true. With the word truah, praise forth to Hashem, to the Lord of our strength. Give blasts before the God of Yaakov. Okay, now that parak in Tehillim. Let me just get it to Tehillim here. Okay. Uzi Maus Nutov Kino Naim Im Navel Tiku Bachodesh Shofar Bachesel Yom Chagenu Kichok Bishalhu Mishpat Yaakov. So obviously the Mizmor that is often directly associated with Rosh Hashanah. That's what you would say in the Musaf. B'mincha Mahu Omer. Now the Mincha, again, now you realize it's Rosh Hashanah. The witnesses came. What is the Shir Shoyom? You say at the Mincha. At Mincha. Kol Hashem Yachil Midbar. The voice of God will cause the wilderness to tremble, because that also is a mizmor that has a lot of idea of voices and sounds and kol, as in kol shofar. So just to give you a sense, kol Hashem alamayim, elak Elohim, Hashem alamayim, kol Hashem b'koach, kol Hashem b'dar, kol Hashem shover zim, v'yishaber Hashem et arzei avanon, v'yikdein koegel, kol Hashem chotzev lafzeish, kol Hashem yachil midbar, etc. Kol Hashem yicholel ayalot. So it could be also that there's maybe a certain sense, by the way, of a certain maybe even massive voracious imagery, like the sound of God, causing all of nature to tremble. But more significantly, it's just the idea of kol and the voice of the shofar, lishmoa kol shofar. Okay, so that's what you would say. Rashi says that it's also, that's Kidei Lahaskir Rosh Hashanah Zuchus Kol Shofar Shel Matan Torah. That maybe the idea there of the voice of God causing all of nature to tremble evokes the idea of the mountain trembling and Matan Torah. Okay, so that's what you would say at Mincha. How about when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Thursday? So which, by the way, does not happen for us, Lo Adu Rosh. Okay, but anyway, but let's say Rosh Hashanah falls out on Thursday. I'm sorry,
Sure
I'm sorry. It doesn't fall out on Friday, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So if it falls out on Thursday, right, which does happen for us.
This year.
There you go, right. That's why you get all those 3-day yontovs in Tishrei, exactly. Okay, so when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Thursday, so the Shir Shayim of Thursday is Harinu Le'Elohim V'Zeinu, which is what you would have said in Shachris, because in Shachris you say the normal day of the week Shir Shayim. So you don't want to say the same Shir Shayim in Musaf, because that would be the shir you would normally have as a Rosh Hashanah shir. But if you said it in Shachris, what are you going to say in Musaf? So shir shelo harninu l'mazeinu lo haya omer b'shachrit harninu mipnei shechozer v'kofel hasaper. So rather no, you're going to keep Musaf the way it is. Musaf stays fixed with that harninu le'elokim l'mazeinu. That idea of tiku b'chodesh shofar is always going to be the fixed shirah for Musaf. So you're going to change the shirah for shacharit. So what are you going to say? So what do you say in shacharit instead? Hasirosi mishevo shichmo. I have removed the bonds, I've removed from him the bonds. Now, of course, the problem is that that's the exact same parak as Harninu Le'Elokim Uzeinu.
Right.
Okay? But the point is they would divide the parak into two halves. So since, again, and part of that, even the part that does not mention Tiku B'Chodesh Shofar, but the thing that speaks about removing the bonds and Eidus B'Yehosef Samo B'Tzei Solar Mitzrayim, when Joseph went over the land of Egypt, was freed and was ruler of Egypt, it's understood that on Rosh Hashanah, right, Yosef was freed, if you remember that earlier discussion in the first parak. So what you do is you divide the parak into two halves. The Musaf you keep as the fixed, which is the Tikkun HaChodesh Shofar, which is what you want to be having for Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. The Shacharis, which normally would be the exact same, you say the other half of that parak. You want it to be different, but you're going to say the other half. You won't do a repeat, you'll say the other half. So in the morning you say the second half, which talks about Yosef being freed. And in Musaf, you do the first half, which talks about Tikkun B'Chodesh Shofar. Okay, now, that's all very nice if you know by Shachris that it's Rosh Hashanah. But let's say you don't know yet by Shachris it's Rosh Hashanah. So by Shachris you said the normal Shir Shel Yom of Thursday. Mm-hmm. So then what are you going to do? What's going to happen at Musaf? So v'imbo edim achar tamish shachar, the witnesses came after Shachris. So for the morning you already said the Thursday Shir Shel Yom, and you already said Tikkun B'Chodesh Shofar. Then Omer Harninu. So then you're going to repeat it in Musaf. You will have it. You will do it twice. Even though you're going to repeat it. Okay, so you get the idea. So you have here, right? I don't know if any of these work because they've been left uncovered. I don't know which person decided. Okay, so Shachris, you say Shir Shel Yom, the normal Shir Shel Yom. Musaf, you say the Harninu, right, which is the Tikkun B'Chodesh Shofar. And Mincha, Tamid Shobein Harbayim, you say Kol Hashem B'Koach. Okay, so that's what you do. Now, if it's Thursday, then this normally becomes Harninu, right? That's the thing of Thursday. So if you know by Shacharis that it's already Rosh Hashanah, so you're only going to do the second half of this. You're only going to do the Eidus B'Yehosef Shama, which is because of B'Yehosef, because it's the second half, but that you'll do the second half, and here you'll do the first half, and Shalom Al Yisrael. This is relevant because of Tikkun B'Chodesh Shofar. This is relevant because Yosef was Yatim Beis Yisrael. But if you did not know by the morning, so by the morning you thought it was not yet, you didn't yet realize it was Rosh Hashanah, you're going to say Harninu, and you'll repeat Harninu here. Now, 1 minute. Why is that relevant for us? Because we're trying to prove whether what they did was when they didn't know, right? Remember the question is when they did not know at Mincha time, did they not say anything or did they say the weekday thing, right? That was the question, if you remember, in the debate in our Mishnah. What did you do when you didn't know? Did you not do any shir or did you say the weekday one? So now the Gemara is going to say, let's see if we can infer it here, because here it comes to Shachris, witnesses haven't come. You don't yet know, And this mission is assuming, right, is assuming, what do? You say the weekday one, even though it's going to get you problems if it finds out here, right? But according to your idea that at Mincha, when they didn't know, they didn't say anything. So here on a Thursday, if you don't know at Shacharis, you shouldn't be saying any Shir Shel Yom. Okay, so you see, obviously, when you don't know, you say the weekday one. And that's how you can get the scenario that you wind up repeating it and saying it twice. 1 minute. So it says like this. So if you say that when you don't know, you say the weekday one, and that's what happened when we didn't know at Mincha time, that's why you'll wind up saying the Shir Shel Yom Haninu Lelukim Uzeinu if it was Thursday and you didn't yet know, and then by Musaf, when it became Rosh Hashanah, you'll repeat it. But if you say when you don't know, you don't say it at all, my Omer V'Kofla, why would you repeat it? You shouldn't say anything Thursday morning. Someone says no. Shani Hasam Deshir Di Yomehu. No, that's different. Because here, right, the general practice on Shacharis was to say the Shir Shel Yom. That's what we did even when we knew it was Rosh Hashanah, right? Even in a normal day, let's say the witnesses came in and we knew it was Rosh Hashanah, Shacharis, we said the Shir Shel Yom. If it was Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, or Shabbos, we would always say the Shir Shel Yom, even when we knew it was Rosh Hashanah. The only thing was, when it was Thursday, Rosh Hashanah, we didn't want it to be a repeat. But if we don't know, it's not so bad to say the normal Shir Shel Yom, because that's what we do anyway on a normal Shacharis, even when we know it's Rosh Hashanah. The issue we were talking about was when you don't know by Mincha time. There, right, when you know it's Rosh Hashanah, we never say the Shir Shel Yom. So there, if we don't know whether at this stage, whether it's Rosh Hashanah or not, you could argue don't say anything. Why say the Shir Shel Yom? The normal Shir Shel Yom is totally inappropriate here. So here, maybe when we didn't know, we didn't say anything, rather than saying something totally inappropriate. But here, if we don't know, fine, we'll do the normal Shir Shel Yom. It's what we normally do anyway, even when we know it's Rosh Hashanah. Okay, yes, Charlie.
How could you know that it's Rosh Hashanah in time for the morning Tamid because it's given before sunrise? And the court wouldn't be examining witnesses that early.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe everybody saw it the night before, and you told them to hold off on the morning Tamid until you could finish processing it or something. Or maybe you accepted the witnesses very quickly before they got to pouring the wine, because you would only say the shir by the wine. Mm-hmm. But it is a good question. It would be very, very rare that you would know here, and that's basically anyway the point. Here we always say the shir shel yom. We basically never know at this stage it's Rosh Hashanah. So to say we're just going to say the normal shir shel yom is not. It makes sense. Whereas by Mincha, since you always, or almost always by then know it's Rosh Hashanah, and we never say the weekday Shir Shel Yom when it's Rosh Hashanah, there if we don't know, maybe we'll just say nothing. So you can't prove based on what you don't know if you don't know here, where we'll do the standard thing to tell you what you do when you don't know here. There we might do nothing, yes.
This is before they decided not to accept witnesses?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out in that pre-Takana period, what did they do wrong that one time they did it wrong? Did they not do anything, or did they say the wrong thing? Okay, let's just continue a little bit, okay? Tanya, we're talking about Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Akiva. Barishan Ma'omer. Now we get to sort of move beyond that question of exactly what their mistake was and focus on just generally what was the Shir Shel Yom. Okay, so this is the basis of our Shir Shel Yom. This is the basis, right? Of it is in Tamid. That's good. Did you remember that?
We say
I know, but okay. Anyway, all right. So yes, it's a mission. Tamid. Let's take or bright. Actually, there's a mission that's very similar. Yeah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mishum Rabbi Akiva, Barisha Ma'omer. What do they say? What do you say on Sunday? What do they say in the Beis Hamikdash? Lashem Artum Lo'ah. To God is the land and its fill. Hashem shekana v'hikneh v'shalit bolamo. Because God created the world and hikneh and transferred it over to human beings. Of course, He didn't transfer it over to human beings then, but it was for the purpose of giving it over. V'shalit bolamo, and ruled over the entire world. So Hashem artum loah. It's interesting the word v'hikneh there, because that doesn't seem relevant yet to the theme or to what happened on the first day of creation. But Sheni ma'o Yomi. What did they say on Monday? Gadol Hashem u'mehulal me'od. God is great and and much praised. Because He divided his creations, meaning He split, the waters above and the waters below, and He ruled over them. And what exactly that has to do with Gadol Hashem Umehulal Ma'od? Rashi says. Because the pasuk is about the end of the pasuk. There is what's the end of the pasuk? That's the Har Kadsho. Hold on, it's B'Elokim Har Kadsho, in God's holy mountain. So somehow the idea of God being up on a mountain and dividing the rakia from the land somehow evokes that idea of the division of the rakia and the waters above the rakia and the waters below. That happened on Monday.
To rule from.
Right.
You know,
so he has a place to rule from. Right.
It wasn't there before.
Exactly. So there was basically a rakia. But Shlishi Hayomim, on Tuesday, which is right when the earth brings forth the vegetation and the waters collect to make the ocean, Hayomim, Elokim Nitzav Ba'adat El. God stands amongst the congregation of God. Hashem Shigila Aretz, he revealed the land. B'chachmato, v'hichin tevel la'adato. It rhymes a little bit here. You wonder if there was also, this was somehow liturgical as well, even this description. You hear these descriptions sort of are a little poetic. So he revealed the land and he prepared the, dry land for his community. So that's Ba'adat El, there's a sense of he made it habitable for people to live in. Eidah. Bervi Hayomrim, on Wednesday, which is the day that the luminaries were created, El Mekamot Hashem, God is a God of vengeance. Al Shem Shabarach Chama v'Levana, he created the sun and the moon, V'atili Parah me'ovdehem, and in the end he's going to pay back those that worship them, the worshippers of the sun and the moon and the stars and the constellations. So that's a pretty funny thing to be associating with these things, which are so much about giving us, heat and light, and so and translating it through the lens of Avodah Zarah.
Light and idolatry.
And idolatry, exactly. Well, there's the pasuk in Dvarim, Asher Chalak Hashem Elokecha Otam L'chol Hamim Asher Tachas Kol Hashemayim.
Yeah.
Okay. B'chamishi Ma'orim, what do they say on the fifth day, which is the birds and the fish? Haninu le'Elohim uzeinu, give forth a song to God of our strength. Hashem Shabar Ofos v'Dagim l'Shabeach Lishmo, because of all of the beauty of diversity of creature that praise God's name. Right? He says we praise God's name by seeing the diversity of nature. Again, that's a pretty weak tie-in. That whole pasuk Eidos B'Yosef Samo V'Tzeisol. What that has to do with Thursday? There's so many prokim Tehillim that talk about praising God. And ones that more explicitly talk about praising God because of the beauty and diversity of nature.
It's a praising of God specifically around moments of creation.
Yeah. So where do you see that in the Shir Shal Yom of Hamishi? Mamnatzeach alagiti tarninu le'Elohim uzeinu harilu le'Yakov suzi musnutov kinunayim navel tiko b'chodesh shover b'chesed yom chagenu kichok nishalu b'shpat le'Yakov. What does that have to do with creation? I'm saying there are so many more prakim in Tehillim that have to do with creation and the beauty, right? Okay. Bashishima Hayomim, on Friday they would say, Hashem Malachihu Slavesh, God is king, he cloaks himself in glory, or in Al Shem Shegamar Malachto, he finished the acts of creation, and he ruled over them. And there were human beings. You could speak about God being king when there's humans to be king over. Bashvi Yomim, and on the seventh day, on Shabbos, they would say, Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat, which is obvious, but even here it's given a reframing. It's not just a normal Shabbat, but in the context here of thinking about creation, Yom Shekulo Shabbat, the day which will all be fully Shabbat, which we'll see what that means in a minute. It's basically going to mean this vision of the world existing for 6,000 years, and then in the 7,000 years, the world will be destroyed, so it'll be a complete cessation. There will no longer be any world anymore.
That's the end of the bright.
Yeah. No. Well, Amar Reb Nechemia, so says Reb Nechemia back, Ma Ra'u Chachamim, or some have the version, Ma Ra' Rebbe Akiva, L'chalek bein ha'prachim halalu. What makes you distinguish the Shabbos explanation, which you framed in terms of the future world, as opposed to the previous explanations which you framed in terms of creation? Ella, Barishon, so now we're going to say all the same thing to get to Shabbos. Barishon, Shekana v'hikne v'shalit ba'olamo. B'sheni, Shechilek masav u'malach haleya. B'shlishi, Shekila aretz b'chachmasa v'hechin teva le'adaso. B'revi, Shabar chamo levana v'atili parmi ovdehen. B'chamishi, Shabar over to dagim l'shabeach lishmo. B'shishi, Shegamar malachto malach haleya. B'shvi, so all the first 6 he agrees, but on the Shabbos, on the 7th, Hashem Sheshavat. The simple explanation, God rested from creation. That's mean Rosh Yom Hashanah. Why do you have to make any chachmas that it's about the future world? What they're debating is the debate of Rav Katina, of the position of Rav Katina. Rav Katina, because Rav Katina says, the world will exist for 6,000 years, so we're in the last 200 and change years of the world. The Chad Charev. and 1 year it'll be destroyed. There will be, all of creation will cease. God will be lifted up alone on that day. And the idea of a day of God is 1,000 years. So that's what Rav Ketina says. Rabbi disagrees, and he says, Trei charuv, it'll be destroyed for 2,000 years. We will be brought back to life, because the idea is after this period that the world will be destroyed, then there will be Tchias HaMeisim. So after 2 days, we will be brought back to life, and therefore it'll be 2,000 years of destruction, that there will be no world. So therefore, whether you can say, Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat refers to the future, there will be 1,000 years that the world will cease, is if you hold like Rav Ketina, there will only be 1,000 years. But if you hold like Rabbi, it will be 2,000 years, then it has to be referring to the past. Again, it's funny because why anyway, it still doesn't get to the point of why Rabbi Akiva would be shifting the focus from the past to the future. Why shouldn't we be talking about Bereshis? Why should we be talking about, this sort of future time? And why do you want to be singing about it? I mean, it's one thing to think about, like, when we talk about Shabbos being Me'ein Olam Haba, it doesn't mean the period when there's no human beings and no world and everything is just right. You're talking about like the Olam Haba. So why exactly would this be something you would be praising and singing about? I really have no idea. I should say this whole idea of 1,000 years, like the creation modeling 1,000 years, epochs of 1,000 years modeling the 6 days of creation. There's like a famous Ramban in Bereshit where he tries to sort of work this through, for the entire history of the world. How the first 1,000 years is somehow is modeled after the first day of creation, and the second 1,000 years of world history follows things about the second day of creation. So you can read that Ramban. It's interesting how this idea sort of gets played out, and obviously also in terms of types of eschatological visions that Mashiach is coming in 200 and some odd years or whatever. But first the world will be destroyed, then Mashiach will come.
Well, it's like Rabbi Akiva laughing on the Rabbi.
Yeah, interesting. He's looking towards the future destruction.
Future redemption will occur
after the period of destruction. That's a very nice explanation. Okay. So anyway, shifting from this interesting question of what the day would look like on Rosh Hashanah before the witnesses would come, we now are just getting into the regular issue of what you would say in the Shir Shayah. Now that we've done that, now we have to get to the issue of Musaf. So let's take a look on Shabbos. So that's what you would say at the Tamid, presumably the morning and the afternoon Tamid. What would you say in Musaf? So Rav Ananam, I'm sorry, no, not the afternoon, the morning. We'll get to the afternoon in a minute. That's what you'd say in the morning Tamid. What would you say in the Musaf? So Ma Yomrim, Amarav Anan Bar Rava, Amarav Haziv Lecha. So this is a very nice little acronym. The glow is to you, which is obviously the idea that it's a glow with Shabbat. But also, this is a way of breaking up Ha'azinu into 6 segments. The initially 6 segments of 6 psukim, and then in the end, 4 segments of 6 psukim and 2 segments of 8 psukim. So if you look, Rashi spells it out, or at Tosos right here, inserted, Ha'azinu Hashemayim Va'aretz, etc. Zechor Yemos Olam, that's the Zayin. Yarkivei Olam Masei is the Yud. Vayar Shem Vayinatz. Okay, so each of those segments is 6 psukim. Lulei Ka'aso Yevagur is the Lamed, and the Chaf is Ki Yadin Hashem Amo. Okay, so now it's a funny thing to be reading on Shabbat, because if you remember the theme of Hazinu, it's not so cheery, right? It's about, we sin and God punishes us and God wipes us out. We would have totally wiped us out, but then in the end, so it's a little bit of funny. So let's take a look as the Gemara continues. The same way they're divided here into these 6 segments for the Shir Shayom of Musaf, that's how they're divided in Shul when you read Hazinu as the Parsha and how you divide the Aliyot. Of course, there are 7 aliyot, but we'll figure it out. What would they say at the mincha, meaning at the Tamid Shabbat or Bayim on Shabbos? So presumably on the normal korbanot on a weekday, you'd say the same thing you said in the morning. But as we saw by Rosh Hashanah, at least on a Chag or whatever, you would say a different Shir Shayom in the afternoon. So what would they say? Not so that we know what they said in the morning. Mizmor Shir Le'am Shabbos. Musaf they would say Hazinu. What would they say in the Tamid Shabbat and Harbayim? So Amar of Yochanan Az Yashir Moshe by the which is the Shir Sayam. Umi Kamocha, and then Mi Kamocha, which is the second part of the Shir Sayam, the Az Yashir, and then the other Az Yashir in the Torah, which is Ali Be'er and Ula, the Shir of the Be'er. Mm-hmm. So you wind up having is between Musaf and Mincha, all of the she wrote in the Torah get said on Shabbat, the Shir of Hazinu and the Shir of Az Yashir and Ali Be'er and La. Okay, but it's still quite funny because, now we a little bit understand why you got to say Hazinu if you want to say all the Shirot. But still, Musaf, which is all about the identity of the Chag, I would much rather do that, I don't know, Shiras Hayam, let's say, or even Ali Be'er and La, leave Hazinu for the afternoon. It's still pretty funny because Hazinu is not the most uplifting of the Shirot in the Torah. So, Ibailu, they asked the question. When you say that Hazinu is divided into 6 segments, and these other, and Az Yashir and the other two into 3 divisions, would you say it on one Shabbos, all 6 segments for Musaf and all 3 segments for Mincha, and there would just be different, music for each one, or breaks in the music, in the singing? Or maybe it would be on a cycle of 6 Shabbatot. Each Shabbos a different segment of Hazinu, and a cycle of 3 Shabbatot, a different segment of the other Shirim. I've been saying Shirot, it's Shirim, right? Mm-hmm. Shirim, okay. So Tashma, coming here. Titania Am Reb Yossi, Acher Rishona Omeret Achat. Reb Yossi says by the time the first, meaning Musaf, has gone through the cycle once, you've gone through one cycle of the Musaf of Hazinu, Shniya Chozer Shtayim, the Tamid Shabbat Arbaim has gone through 2 cycles. So clearly that means that you are doing it one unit a Shabbos, right? So after 6 weeks, you've gone through 1 cycle of the Musaf, and you've gone through 2 cycles of the Tamid Shabbat Arbaim. So it's not talking about that you would just a way you would divide the music, but you do the whole thing. No, you would actually do only 1 segment per Shabbat. Okay, so again, it's pretty funny. That means on a particularly given Shabbos, what you could be saying in the Musaf would be Vayar Hashem Vayinatz Mikatz Panavu Pnosav Vayomer Astira Panaim, where it's very bizarre, right? That you're not even saying the whole Hazinu. You said the whole thing. At least you can say, okay, you get a little context. It's a little more positive at the end. I do find it very strange that you would say Hazinu. That would be what you'd say at Musaf, and that you would actually even say just a few psukim, which could be very negative. Yes.
I was going to say, probably the 7. The reason why it's the 6 and why, even though there's 7 aliyot, 7th aliyah is not part of the
right. It's not part of the Shirah. Yeah, right. Correct. The 6th of the Shirah, and then the 7th is after the Shirah. That is correct. Okay. So so now we know what you would say on Shachris, you'd say at Musaf, and what you would say for Shabbos, what you would say at Mincha. And the same way it sort of follows the pattern here, like we said by Rosh Hashanah, you would say one thing at Musaf, and then what you'd say at Mincha would be different than what you would say at what you would say here. Okay? Yes.
Can you take a question about the Musaf itself?
Can I take a question?
Yeah, because we sort of dealt with this yesterday.
What?
So they're not sure whether they can give the Musaf or not.
Yeah, so we said yesterday that Tozu said that they would do the Musaf after the mincha. When they did not yet have the Takana,
right,
they would do the Musaf after the mincha.
I was wondering why 19 of the 21 Musaf animals are olot.
Yeah.
So couldn't you give the
T'nai? Yeah, Tozu suggests that possibility too.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Bar Idi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Eser Masot. Now that we're talking about, so now we move from what they used to do in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, but then of course the shift was also that then there was a Chorban Abayis, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai switched it and said now we can accept witnesses. So now we're going to sort of shift gears into the Chorban Abayis. So said Rabbi Idi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Eser Masot Nasa Shechina. The 10 travels. The Shechina moved or departed like 10 degrees of slowly departing from the Beit HaMikdash at the time of the Chorban Abayis. This was based on Psukim and Bayis Rishon. Ukenegdan Galsa Sanhedrin Mishmikrai, and that you learn from verses. Ukenegdan, and parallel to them, Galsa Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin was exiled from its place in the Beit HaMikdash during the period of the Chorban, and that we know Migamara from tradition. Let's take a look. Ezer Masot Nasar Shechina, Mikrai, we know it from verses. Mikapos, the Kruv, it went from being on the cover of the Aron to the cherubim that were, now the cherubim were actually molded onto cover, but you could say it goes from like the space between the wings over the cover to be like maybe on top of the wings. But also Rashi says, in the Mikdash of Shlomo, there are these huge statues of Kruvim, on the ground. So it went from over the Aron to atop of one of the statues of the Kruvim. Mikapos, the Kruv, and Mikruv, from one of the Kruvim to another Kruv, from one Karuv to the next. obviously this is very, if not anthropomorphized, but very, talking about it in like a physical sense. But that's what you get in the Torah. The sense of God's presence, it appears in a cloud, and there's some physical expression of the Shekhinah, and therefore this thing is moving. It's on the move. It's in exile. So the mikruv lemiftan, from the kruv to the threshold of the where the hechal either goes to the ulam, or more likely where the ulam, the threshold of the ulam, which is like the entrance hall, goes into the chatzer, right? So the basic sort of structure, right? You've got your hechal, right? This is the here, right? Then you've got the ulam. All of this is roofed. Okay, this is like the entrance hall. Okay, and then you have the open chatzer, right? And here's the mizbeach. Okay, so first it goes from here to, if we take Rashi, here are these standing pruvim. So it goes from here to here, and then to that, and then it goes to the threshold. So it's now sort of leaving. It's sort of leaving the hechal, and it's on its way out. It goes to the threshold into the chatzer. Miftan lachatzer, from the threshold into the chatzer proper. Michatzer lemizbeach, and then here there are like steps. So it's on the threshold here, and then it goes into the chatzer, and then from the chatzer it goes onto the mizbeach. Michatzer lemizbeach, and mizbeach lagag, from the mizbeach to the roof. Umigag lachoma. So there's a question here exactly the girsa, but anyway, so which roof are we talking about? Rashi says, where's Rashi? Rashi says, hold on. Straight for Rashi. Migag, mizbech legag, migag lachoma. No, legag, what does it say? Hold on. Gag hahichal, right? So Rashi says, which is a fun thing. It's sort of like jumping backwards. It goes the way because the only thing that has a roof here, right, are these things are like these are like roofed. So then it's a little bit jumping backwards. Some want to say the gear says that it goes to the wall, and then from the wall to the roof of. It's a little unclear what the roof is. The Gemara has a different version. He says anyway. He says first it goes to the roof here, and then from the roof then it goes down. Anyway, so not exactly clear. It's going back to the roof of the hikal, but it might have done that before. So anyway, from the mizbeach to the roof, and from the roof to the wall around the. So anyway, it went from some roof here, it went to the wall. And now from the wall, now it's leaving Har. Now it's going to completely leave Har Bayis altogether. Umigag l'choma now goes into all of Jerusalem. Me'ir lahar, and from the Jerusalem to the mountain, which is Har Hazetim, the mountain opposite Jerusalem. Umehar lamidbar, and from there it goes into the wilderness. Midbar Yehuda. And once it left the wilderness, the Shekhinah went and dwelled in its place in the heavens, and left the earth completely. I will go back to my place. I don't belong here on earth anymore. Going back up into the divine realm. And now we're going to show how we get this from Sukkim. So we know the Shekhinah begins on top of the Kaporas. God rode on a cherub and he flew. Some take out that verse because that's not in the context of the exile of the Shekhinah. But another verse says, the presence of the God, the glory of the presence of the God of Israel lifted up from the kruv that it was upon, El Miftan Habayit, to the threshold of the house. So there you see it somehow, even just by that pasuk, it usually was on the kaporet, but now we see it was on a kruv, and we see that went from the kruv to the threshold. By the way, these psukim are taken from all over the place, so it's not like the psukim make it clear this exact progression. This was how Chazal wove together different psukim to explain this type of a progression. Okay, umimiftan l'chatzer t'chsiv Vayimalei Abayis es Hanan, v'achetzer mal'ah et noga kvod Hashem. And the house was filled with the cloud, and the courtyard was filled with the shining of the glory of God. I do want to say something about this idea of the Shekhinah, that word of the shining, because in general, right, if you think there's a lot of times now we're reading Bamidbar where it says, Uchvod Hashem nir'ah be'anan, the glory of God was seen in the cloud. Mm-hmm. And it makes it seem like there is this thing called Kavod Hashem.
Yeah.
And based on psukim like the one we just read, the Noga Kavod Hashem, the shining of the glory of God, the general way that scholars understand that what the Torah refers to when it says Kvod Hashem means some type of a shining that represents the presence of God, and it's near Abe Anan because you can't see it directly. You have to see it through a cloud. It's too powerful to see that shining directly. So that's why it's seen through a cloud, but it means something is there. There's some shining. So when it talks about this Shekhinah departing, presumably it means it's also in some physical, in its physical manifestation as well, not just in some like some theological way, and therefore the actual shining, or maybe that was enveloped in a cloud, is moving from these places and slowly going into exile.
It's like the sneh. It's a light,
right,
embedded in some
nice
other surroundings.
Right. Okay, Mechatzel Mizbeach, and from there it goes to the altar. T'chsiv Ra'isias Hashem nitzav al Mizbeach. God was on the altar, so he's left the floor of the Chatzer. Mizbeach la'Gag. T'chsiv Tov lashevet al pinat Gag. It is good to sit on the corner of the roof. So better I'm getting out of here. Better to go up to the roof. Migag lachoma, from the roof to the wall. T'chsiv Hiner Hashem nitzav al chomat anach. That God was on the wall. Mechoma li'ir t'chsiv kol Hashem la'ir. The voice of God to the city. Yikara will call out. So it's calling out to the city, but somehow it's also like in the city. Okay. Ume'ir lahar, and then from Jerusalem to Har Zeitim. T'chsiv hayal kvod Hashem me'al toch ha'ir. God, the presence, the glory of God removed from the midst of the city. Vayamod al har, and it was stood on the mountain. Asher mikedem la'ir, to the east. So it's Har Zeitim. And from the mountain to the wilderness, Tov shevet be'aretz midbar, better to dwell in a land in the land of the wilderness, rather than to dwell among sinning people is the idea. And from there it went to its place. I will go back to my place. So this is very poignant, like this idea about just the fact that it just brings the powerful image of God departing and God leaving the earth and what that means. The presence of God on the earth, and now it's no longer there. And when you sort of describe it in stages, I think it makes it more powerful and poignant than if it was just all of a sudden. But it's also powerful and poignant in the sense of God's, desire to hold on and to still hope it won't have to be, and the slow departure, the hope that it won't have to happen, and that sense of God always hoping for us to do tshuva and not to have to leave, which is, the next line, which the Gemara says like this: we waited for 6 months. Maybe we would do tshuva and it would not have to leave. Once we did not do tshuva, Amar, God said, Shekhinah said, Tipach atzmam, let their bones be blasted. Shenemar ve'einei rishayim tachlena, the eyes of the wicked will waste away. Umanos avad minahem, and escape will be lost from them. V'tikvasam mapach nafash, and their longing will be an emptying of the soul or a blasting of the soul, which means that you long for something and it doesn't happen. And God says, "To heck with you! I waited 6 months, goodbye, and I'm out of here." But again, that idea of waiting. Look, also the Torah is constantly about hashocheni tam betoch tumotam, that God knows that we sin, and God still has agreed to dwell among us. And here the point is that the sin got so much that God could not maintain that, could not maintain being among us with the sin. But even so, that desire to still be among us and the slow departure, hoping we'll do tshuva, it's just a very, very powerful image. Yes.
These verses were not written in the right chronological
I said these are all over in the Gemara. It's not like they're in the verses. It's the rabbinic read of weaving together the verses to tell this story. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Okay, Ukenegden Galta Sanhedrin, Mi Gemara, And similarly, at the time of the Churban, the Sanhedrin went in exile, and that we know from tradition. Lishkas Hagazis L'Chanut, they went from the Lishkas Hagazis, which was a chamber that they had, in the Azara, in the courtyard, and they went from there to the Chanut. The stores, anybody knows in Jerusalem, they have the cardo, they show you the stores that they had that were lining at the bottom of Har Bayis. So that's where they moved. They moved to the bottom of Har Bayis. They took up a storefront there. Okay? Umechanut Lirushalayim, and from there they moved into more central Jerusalem. Yerushalayim liyavne, from Jerusalem they went to Yavne after the Churban Abayis. That was the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai story. Yavne leUsha, then they went from Yavne, they went to Usha. Why did they leave? So if you look at Rashi says, K'shahaya hanasi dar bo kivin shaisa Sanhedrin imo. The Sanhedrin would follow the Nasi. So when the Nasi decided to move to Usha, the Sanhedrin went with him. Usha liyavne, and then they went back to Yavne. Yavne l'Usha, and then back to Usha. So the Nasi kept on moving back and forth, whether it was Rabbi Gamliel and then his son Rabbi Shimon. So the Sanhedrin moved back and forth. By the way, using the phrase exiled doesn't work so well here, right? Because it's not like a sense of slowly detaching and departing. You're out of Yerushalayim, and now you're just moving around to wherever the Sanhedrin is. So it's not the exact same sort of narrative as exile once you're in this stage. Umeyusha l'Shifram, which was the next place that the house of the Nasi was. Umeshifram l'Beis Sha'arim, right? We know Beis Sha'arim, right? They've done these excavations in Beis Sha'arim that they have about, the Nasi's house, right? Isn't that the way they have those extensive excavations?
Yeah.
Beis Sha'arim?
You can see the sarcophagi.
Right, exactly. Okay, Beis Sha'arim Litzipori, and then they went to Tzipori, Mitzipori, Litveria. All of these were where the Nasi's house moved, and the Sanhedrin would move with it. Vitveria Amuka Mikulan. Tveria is lower than them all in terms of just physical depth.
Below sea level.
Right, it's below sea level.
Yeah.
And you have been brought low, and you will speak from the land. Now that maybe is to help fit in to the exile imagery. That at the end of the process they're very, very low. Because otherwise, after you've left Yerushalayim, what exile is it? It's moving around, but is it more exile than before? Anyway, but still the imagery is obviously they're no longer in that fixed, established place. It's constantly, moving and in transition. Now I want to say something about this. When did this happen? So obviously this happened in the time of the Bayit Sheni. It's all about where Rebbe moved and Rebbe Shimon and Rebbe Gamliel and the house of the Nasi and so on. What?
Post Bayit Sheni.
Post Bayit Sheni, right. But before the Bayit Sheni was destroyed, they moved out of the Lishkat HaGazi to the Chanut and then to Yerushalayim, and then after it was destroyed, they left from Yerushalayim to Yavne. So it's interesting for a moment to consider the parallel that the sense of exile that occurred in Bayis Rishon was an exile of Shechina. Exile that occurred in Bayis Sheni was an exile of the Sanhedrin. And does that reflect the idea that the like in the Bayit Rishon, the sense more was the sin in the Bayit Rishon, like we say, Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, Shfichus Damim, but the sense much more was that it was about religious sin. That even though Shfichus Damim is obviously also, a crime against a person, but the sense much more was primarily, really, if you read the Psukim, it's a lot about Avodah Zarah, and it's a lot about religious sin, and there it's like the egg of the Shechina is departing. Whereas Bayit Sheni, right, it was about Sinat Chinam, but what it really means, the way Chazal said, what it really means is the amount of infighting, the lack of leadership, right, the lack of, the whole famous stories in Gittin about I'll make a little nick in the lip, and then the rabbis weren't willing to sort of do the right thing and take the right leadership, or the Kamsa Bar, Kamsa Bar. Anyway, it's all about a failure of leadership and a failure of, the divisions of the people. So to think about that is not the exile of the Shekhinah, but it's the exile of the Sanhedrin, about the religious leadership and how that is sort of the one that is in exile and is departing. I think that there's a powerful sort of, parallel that is going on there. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Sheish Galus. It wasn't 10, it was 6 for the Sanhedrin. Shenemar ki heishach, or Yoshvi Maro, because brought low is the one that dwelled on high, maybe Heishach. Anyway, the one who dwelled on high, Kiryan Niskava, the elevated city, Yashbilena, will be brought down. Yashbila ad aret, brought down to the land. Yagiena ad afar will be brought to the dust. Anyway, so if you count the various verbs or phrases there, you get 6, not 10. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Misham Atidim Ligael. From there they will be redeemed. Shenemar Hitnari Me Afar Kumi Shivi to bestir yourself, get up from the dust, return, and therefore we return from that exile. So again, very interesting, because also the sense, again, about the parallel, the Shekhinah eventually goes up to heaven. What eventually happens to the Sanhedrin, right? Does it disband? I mean, in a way it does. The idea of a central Sanhedrin does disband, and then it becomes no longer centralized. So anyway, but I do think that, as I said, there is this parallel about the sort of God leaving, or the sense also of the failure of leadership, which is the second Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so that was a very interesting end of that. Yes?
There's a period of 6 months that the Jews are free before they leave Egypt. They're no longer slaves.
Right.
I was just thinking there's a 6
Similar.
months here. I don't know.
Oh, that's interesting. 6 months. Right. So
I
I did want to say where it got 6 months. So that's a good question. The Marsha says the 6 months is because there were 6 months from Asara B'Teves till the 9th of Tammuz, and in the Beit Rishon, actually, the 9th of Tammuz was the date in which the city was breached. So it actually was exactly 6 months from the time that the siege was laid. Although I think were they the same year? I didn't think it was the same year. It is the same year?
Our school says that it was actually 18 months.
A year and 6 months.
They're saying they just use the same day.
Yeah, so the Marshas point out from Asar B'Teves till the 9th of Tammuz is 6 months, but it was a year and 6 months. All right, anyway, but that's an interesting point also, that sense of gradual, and we had sort of the gradual process of redemption as well with the idea of 6 months. That's a very nice parallel. Okay, so as I said, before we get back to Rosh Hashanah, we're here now with the context of Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai, but we are now focusing 2 Mishnayot of this on once again the topic of Kiddush HaChodesh. So let's take a look at this one. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, v'od zos hitkin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made the following takana: she'afilu rosh beis din b'chol makom, even if the head of the beis din was in any place, shelo yu ha'edim ochim el l'makom avad, that the witnesses would not have to find out where the head of the beis din was, even though you normally needed the head of the beis din to do Kiddush HaChodesh, but you wanted the witnesses to always go to one fixed place. You didn't want them to have to always say, oh, he's not here today, everybody's got to move somewhere else. Like the same way they wanted to make sure there would always be a nice meal for them if they came on Shabbos, and they'd always make them feel like they were doing something useful. You want them always to go to a fixed place. So that was his takana. You don't have to start running after the head of the Beit Din. By the way, besides the obvious practical benefits of this, I think it ties into something we discussed on Shabbat about the issue was it Yavne or was it Kol Beit Din? That the shift from Mikdash to Torah also brought with it a decentralization. So here too, the idea, obviously there's a practical element, but the fact that you're willing to be mochel on the head of the Beit Din and to allow the Beit Din to function without the head, also is a move in a sort of in a non-hierarchical decentralization type of a way. So I think these are all very important in terms of that shift from Mikdash to Torah. Okay, so the Gemara says like this: Hahi Ichita, there was a certain woman, Das Menua Ledina, that she got a subpoena or whatever, not a subpoena, but she was sort of made to, whatever it is, a hazmana, we would say, to come to court. She was actually a borrower, and the creditor was suing her and demanding that she come to court.
That is a subpoena, no?
That is a subpoena?
Yeah.
A summons. All right. Subpoenas is testify, right? Okay, thank you. It's a summons. She got a summons. Kameda Meimer ben Ardai, to appear before a Meimer in Nahardai. Although a Meimer the Mechuzah, but it happened to be that day a Meimer was in Mechuzah. She refused to schlep all the way to Mechuzah. So Kasa Pticha Ilava. So they wrote a like a cherem on it, like a document that she's in what would we call it now, in a contempt of court. Okay, so this happens nowadays as well. They write like a shamta, like they say somebody's in contempt of the Beis Din. Amalei Ravashi la Meimer. So Ravashi said to her, how could you do this to her? Our Mishnah says, so obviously it's not the same as the Kiddush HaChodesh, but it's the same logical point. People shouldn't have to schlep after where the chief judge is. They should just go to the fixed location of the court, and if you're not there, somebody else will deal with the case. So it seems like a very reasonable argument. Amarle, he said back to him, Hani milin edis HaChodesh. That's for testimony for the wound. Because if you make them say, oh, you all came, but he's not here, next month they're not going to bother coming. And that's the same idea we had, earlier about the Seudah and about, all those other things that they did for them. But Aval Hacha here, The borrower is a slave to the creditor, meaning, you borrowed money, you have a right, he has a right to schlep you around in order to get his money back. Now, you often wonder, let's say it means she's claiming she didn't borrow money, let's say that's what's being contended. But anyway, here the point is we don't have to worry about what the larger consequence will be because, people are entitled, especially if you realize that they didn't charge interest. So lending money was all like a chesed, essentially, that we would have the system would be, tipped in favor of the creditor makes sense. Of course, the question is, as I said, what happens if it's not clear, if that's exactly what's being contested?
It's strange that it's a woman. Why does it have to be a woman?
I don't know. Tana Rabbanan. Ein Kohanim Risha'im V'alo Pesandalehem L'duchan. The Kohanim could not go up. This is in the Beit Knesset, not in the Beit HaMikdash. In the Beit HaMikdash, the Kohanim would be barefoot. In the Beit HaKnesset, they could not go up to the Duchan to do Birchas Kohanim wearing their shoes. This is one of the 7 takanot that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made. 9, excuse me. Why did he do this? So the Gemara there explains that if a Kohen has his shoes and he bends down to tie his shoelace, so then people will see that he's not participating in the Birchas Kohanim. They won't see him. They'll be crouched down and they'll think, oh, maybe he's puzzle. Other types of concerns. It's a pretty funny, that of all the big takanot, that this type of a thing, seems to be a little bit minor in that context. But anyway, that was one of his 9 takanot. So now we're going to discuss what were his takanot. So she's the high pirka, 6 that we mentioned in this parak. Which are the ones we mentioned in this parak? This one, right, and the 5 in the Mishnah, which were blowing shofar, lulav, blowing shofar in Yavne, lulav the 7 days, not eating the whole day of the 16th, the new grain, accepting the witnesses after mincha time on Rosh Hashanah. The witnesses would always go where the where the basin was, regardless of where the head of the basin was. And this one that we just mentioned, which is about the time of the shoelace. It's not really the high pirka, it really isn't sota, but okay, we mentioned it here. Those 6. Now, by the way, and I'll repeat the point that I said yesterday. If you think about it, almost all of them are not really about being like sort of holding on to the memory of the Beit HaMikdash, but shifting us away from the Beit HaMikdash, like all the things that we said. Now Yavne is the center. Now you don't longer have to have the takana about not accepting witnesses. We live in a different reality. There's even a different reality about the Omer, but it's all about the new reality that we are living in and shifting the focus away from Mikdash and embracing the new Torah-centered and based-in-centered reality. This one about the witness, about the Birchas Kohanim, I don't know how that really exactly fits into the scheme. But anyway, that is 6.
I think it plays into your overarching theory. In other words, here he's making a takana that's ruling over how the protocol of Kohanim outside of the Mikdash in a decentralized context.
So you mean the rabbis are telling the Kohanim what to do? Yes. So it's emphasizing rabbinic authority over Kohen practice.
Over their ritual.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's an interesting thought. Okay. V'chada de pirka kama, one of the first parak. What was the one in the first parak? So the one in the first parak was that they would all the witnesses that would come to testify after Chorban Abayis would only violate Shabbat for Nisan and Tishrei. Another perfect example of how things are different after Chorban Abayis. Mm-hmm. Right now, we don't do it for every month. We only do it for the months that really matter for the calendar, that the witnesses violate Shabbat, only for Nisan and Tishrei. Again, embracing the post-Mikdash reality. Okay, that gets us to 7. The Idach and the other 2 are really debated. The Tanya Vitana Brisa, Ger Shenit Kayer Bizman Hazeh. If somebody converts nowadays, so the halacha is that a convert would normally bring a bird sacrifice as part of his process, a conversion process, which obviously we don't do, and we say that the evid isn't necessary nowadays, but it would normally be part of his conversion process. So what would be the halacha? So he has to set aside money for his bird sacrifices even nowadays, so that when there is a base of mikdash, he'll be able to bring those sacrifices. Rabbi Shimon ben Linzer said, Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yochanan already avoided that because of the takala. What's the takala? You have money in your house that's sanctified for a sacrifice, you might come to misuse it. Now again, besides the hektish misuse problem, again, a perfect example of not turning backwards to the Beit HaMikdash. And it's even more powerful in the context of a ger. Imagine you're a ger and we tell you, your process didn't really finish. Technically, you're still a ger, but it didn't really finish. So set aside the money. So when there's a basic mikdash, you can finish your process. So the entire time, this person is thinking, I'm not fully a ger yet because I haven't finished my process, right? So, and it's just holding on to this fact that I still have to bring a korban. So he said, forget about it. Don't set aside the money. Forget about the fact that you need to bring a korban. So again, very powerful in terms of the looking forward rather than looking backwards.
Who said that about Rabbi Yochanan?
Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Okay, so that gets us to 8. I'm sorry, so that wasn't debated. So we had 6 in this parak. 1 in the previous one, which was about the Eidim coming only on Nisan and Tishrei, is 7. 8 is about the ger, and 9 is a debate. The Idach, the final one, is Pluksa to Rav Papa Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Papa Amar, we're going to have to end here. So we will finish with this and find out what number 9 is tomorrow. Okay. The other daf, we don't have a problem because the last daf is only a half of an hour. Yeah.
See him.
When Rabbi Yochanan says nimna, it means of the